Welcome to EpiSTEM podcast. This EpiSTEM podcast is brought to you from the National Centre of STEM Education at the School of Education in the University of Limerick. I'm your host, Geraldine Simmie, and I'm the Professor of STEM Education here at the Centre and the Director of EpiSTEM. And my co-host,
Michelle Starr, and I am the Research Liaison Officer in EpiSTEM.
Welcome back everybody to the podcast, and Michelle and myself are here today. We're going to have a chat, I think, about education at a crossroads, given we had Liberation Day in America yesterday, and we have the economic world all up in an upheaval. And Hannah Arendt in 1953 said that if there's a change in politics and the economy, then education is going to change as well. So we're going to have a chat about education at a global crossroads anyway, if not an Ireland crossroads and a European one.
Oh yeah, well we'll have to start with America. Come on, we cannot omit that one. Sure we can't, Geraldine.
No.
What I would like, I think starting with America, I mean, you and I, we listen to, and like half the world, I'd say, different podcasts about what's happening politically and specifically in education. And there's one I would like for us to chat about. It's one that you gave me a great book, a loan of your book, which was The Rise and Fall of Neoliberal Order. And I think we're experiencing this now by Professor Gary Gerstle, who is an American historian, professor. And I was listening to him on a podcast called the Macro Hive Conversation Podcast, and he was talking all about Trump. So I don't know, would you like me to give you his perspective?
Yeah, I'd love it, because that whole neoliberal world we're in, he's saying the rise and fall of it.
Yeah.
And so if we're at a crossroads, the question is, where are we going now?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's the big question, and the big question for education, and it's a question that is of deep interest to us in EpiSTEM and in terms of education,
Absolutely.
policy in Ireland and everything.
Yeah, and I think we'll do a dance between now and go back a little bit in history, because we always have to see, the neoliberal and how it's changing. But anyway, what he started off with, he was talking about the Trump first presidency, and he came in, and as a person, he's authoritarian aspirations. But his first presidency, he wasn't organised. He didn't have the inner workings the inner experience of how Washington works, and so therefore he wasn't as well prepared. Whereas this time he's come back, he's had 4 years, and within those 4 years he built up a lot of resentment about people who he thinks have done him wrong, and he has behind him is the Heritage Foundation, which I find very fascinating, because we all know about the heritage, and we'll discuss that a little bit as well, and their project 2025, and which is all about accruing power to the executive. And this is what Trump, this would fit what he wants in his authoritarian way of doing things, because rather than presiding over legislation, etc., it's kind of having this power within an executive, so he can just throw out all these executive orders. And there's two things going on in all of this. He says that one is that because of going this way, giving the power to the executives, it gives the idea that politicians get nothing done, and we do hear about that a lot. And it's the same, we heard that in the 1970s, late 70s, early 80s as well. And the idea, of course, as that unitary executive, and which is given the power to. So. And then he went on and he talks about his tariffs. And I don't know if you have anything to say about the tariffs before I move on, because he just found the history of the tariffs, he was saying, is very, very interesting, in that Trump points to the McKinley time, which is the late 1800s, when tariffs were brought in. And that was around the time of industrialisation. It wasn't long on, and it was a lot of people coming in, immigrants from Europe, and it was kind of a protectionist, and it worked. And it's the area that Trump talks about. But he says what he misses about is the one that, Smoot and Hawley, the tariff in 1931, which brought America into a greater the Great Depression. It deepened it worse. So I thought all of that was very, very interesting. And finally, the very, very interesting perspective, which I think you will like as well, is that how he sees this discussion about Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal. He was saying that he thinks it's a mistake for any of us to think that Trump and people like him do not are climate change deniers, because they're not. What they are is they're realists. They think that this can't be stopped. So they're realists, and there's no point in trying to stop it, or, it might be too expensive, whatever. So it's all about looking at countries that will flourish in the Northern Hemisphere, particularly where there's temperate climates, and they'll be green and they're mineral rich. And then in Greenland, of course, it has other things. It has the mineral resources, and maybe in 30 or 40 years' time, the grass might be green all year round.
Yes.
And of course, there's a controlling of the Arctic pathways. And then with Panama, it's about controlling the shipping.
Yes.
So it's all about protecting from the top Arctic down to the Panama, down to the equator, almost that
protecting
northern
that area,
and having it for Americans, just
yes,
for the
of
Americans.
course.
So it's very interesting.
It is. And I mean, listeners might say, what on earth has this got to do with education, or even to do with STEM education? So I'm going to put that out there as being an important question for us, because actually what's happening in the world today, in this political upheaval, I try and say that there's threats involved, but there's real opportunities as well, particularly when I look at us here in education in Ireland, and I'm looking at what are the opportunities as well as the threats. And I understand how this American executive even got into place in terms of the grains of truth that were there in the way they got elected, because the grains of truth were, let's say, a very divided society, a lot of people being working poor. I saw even in Ireland in the social justice report the other day that we've 145,000 people who are working poor in Ireland. They're people low paid, they have jobs, maybe even two jobs, but they've one job, but they still are finding and struggling and all of that. So if you have too many of those people in a society, somebody will rise out of that space and will actually start blundering about the place. So for me, what that message has to do for education is that education, we have forgotten, I think at times, that education is a public good and it's not a private commodity. And we have ran it for the last 20 years, like in Ireland and in Europe, it has been ran for the last 20 years as if it were a private commodity. We've wanted the smart student, self-regulating, adaptive, resilient, all of that. But there hasn't been a word in any of that policy that we need young people to care for others, to have empathy, sympathy, compassion for others, to try and work with others and build community. So I'll tell you, this morning, I was driving down from Galway this morning in the sunshine, and you know what was really interesting, Michelle, was I was listening to morning radio, which is not something I do every morning, and I was fascinated listening to the politicians in Ireland and different speakers on radio talking about what had happened in the Oval Office and in Washington yesterday. And what was really interesting is they were using words like cooperation, partnership, relationship, that everything is like in Europe now and in Ireland. We're delighted to be in members of Europe, the European Union, that we're now Ireland and Europe all together. They were all huddling together with Britain and with Canada. And now all of a sudden a new language appears, for me anyway, to hear cooperation, collaboration, being a wise person, taking your time to think about what you do. And for me, that is philosophy. That is actually thinking about what's important, what are our values, and what kind of an education system do we want. So we want our young people to be asking why. We want them to know why. Yeah. We don't want any elite to work out what their values are. We want them working out their values themselves. Yeah. It's not being told and obey the rules. It's actually know why the rules are there, and actually, as a human good and a good enough person, try and live by them. So that's what excites me. We're at a crossroads, and education is definitely at a crossroads, because I'm working with the European Commission now, on a group of 8 of us across Europe, and we're working with the European Commission Commission on, I suppose, rethinking and doing a scoping literature review on education and skills at the moment in the light of all the changes that are happening. And Europe is talking about wanting a fairer society, a more sustainable world, a more sustainable society. So this is all good stuff. So how do we get it brought back into the policy in education? So that's why I think what's happening in that political economic world is so important. And I know that's your area, like you're in sociology of education. So that's those relationships between the individual, the society, the planet, that's where sociology lies, isn't it?
It is indeed. And I would really love to think that it will go that way. And it's great when you're not hearing words like competitive and individualism, and you're saying there was partnership and relationships. I mean, these are completely contrary to what we have been listening to, and that whole, which was we were talking about, that it was that neoliberal competitiveness, competition, standardizations, etc. So I would really love to think it will disappear. It won't disappear, but it will change, somewhat. But I'm always worried, I suppose, and I know you would be too, that this could die down, and then everything will go back to normal. The chairs will be moved around the room a little bit, and it'll all go back to normal, because that inclusion, or that awareness of what is going on. And the reason I was talking, first of all, with the whole Trump and the Heritage Foundation, because they were the ones, the Heritage Foundation were the ones who brought in the whole marketisation concept of education. They're the first to use the word producer, which was they referred to as the teachers and the schools and the principals. And they were batting around, the rhetoric that education is just all about the producers and not the consumers, which was the students and the parents. Yes. And of course, this was a time, the late 70s, remember, Reagan, Thatcher time, when there was an oil crisis, when there was a recession, when there was a world recession, when big industries were moving off overseas and manufacturing, yes, these ordinary jobs were going. So, and of course, like everything else, educational reform was meant to change everything for society, help. And education was being blamed. And the Heritage Foundation was very clever, as were the UK ones, like the Hillgate, the British Hillgate, the Centre for Politic Studies, which Thatcher used an awful lot. And they were all very powerful. And they got out into the media, and they were able to say about, we don't have a great educational system in the UK, America, the same thing. Thatcher was banting on about, if you remember, classical education. Do you remember that?
That's
she was
right.
talking about
yes.
the traditional.
And that there is no society and all of that.
And isn't it very, we hear the same words again.
Well, every time education down through the years wanted to be, anytime the state ever wants to change education, it has to actually convince the people. It must paw the ground for a while first. Yeah. What you do in politics is you paw the ground, so you keep telling people something is bad, and then it's bad and it needs fixing. So the way they did it in the UK in particular was they said the teachers are bad, so then we need to push them outside.
In America,
we need to push them off. They don't have any knowledge. We need to make them, guides on the side, and push them. In fact, if we could push them out of the classroom altogether,
and what does it do?
Because that allows industry to come in, etc.
It centralised the curriculum up into the control of the state, and now they're looking for it in a wider scale at the moment. So it's all very, very interesting.
What I think is, I understand the complexity of all the purposes of education. That the economy, that's a part of it. The material world, you want to have people prepared for that. You want them socialising into society, but you also have to recognise people as having an inner life as well as an outer life. There is a need for that spiritual development of people as well. That's why the churches have always been interested and involved in education. It's not just good enough to push people out of education and say it's only for the corporate world. The corporate world have a vested interest in education, and why not? They do need people qualified and skilled for the world, and they need that changing as their needs change.
Absolutely.
But there are so many purposes of education education, and you want to conserve the culture and the heritage, and also move it to the new. So I love Jessie Bazul's work that actually talks about it being a kind of a paradoxical situation that you're in as an educator. You're trying to hold into the space between conserving and changing at the same time.
Yeah.
And he kind of calls it a double ethical bind in doing it. And you can't do that without bringing in politics and knowledge and everything. And I'm thinking of the old Greeks and the way they regard like a wise person. So a wise person wasn't somebody who was just knowledgeable. It wasn't knowledge alone didn't make you a wise person. You needed to have the ethics and you needed to have that going with the knowledge, but you also needed to be connected to the world you were in. So that socio-political, cultural piece.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have that,
yeah.
then you're actually not really educating.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all that aspect that creates that critical thinking
and
as
then
well.
Policy in that way is never equal to practice.
Yeah.
So the state can't really come fully in.
Yeah.
You see, the state, society and the culture, schools and society and the state have the education system, let's say a schooling system. But if the state comes in too far, it would be like being in China, for example, where you can't critique the polity, you can't critique the way the system is run. But if you do that in a democratic country, you've actually made it a fascist country and an authoritarian country. So your education system and how far in the state goes into the classroom. I heard a story the other day about a teacher in Ireland and an inspector going in, and they didn't find that they had their outcomes from the class written on either the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the board. And I thought I was hearing something from China. Honestly,
yeah.
When I heard the inspector walked in and they were expecting that the teacher in every class should have their outcomes written on the right or left hand side of the board. And I said to myself, how far into the classroom is the state going? Is it just rules, regulations, a deterministic system? Or have we got what Hannah Arendt said, that if you have fascism, all you need to do is get rid of two things. One is kill joy and spontaneity.
Yeah.
Make everything very serious.
Well, I think spontaneity is.
Yeah, so get rid of that. Call it all very serious stuff, all counterintuitive. So you've got rid of the intuitive. It all must be counterintuitive, very muscular and very heavy determined. And the second one is you must get rid of what she said, the plurality of the human condition, so that we were all comparing ourselves to an ideal. Yes. There's no diversity among people then.
Yeah, we're cookie cutters.
Yeah.
Another one that, and another Biesta you talk about as well a lot.
Yes.
And about keep the risk. And I always think of that, even in my own teaching. Is
the beautiful risk, he says.
Keep that risk, ask the questions, keep the risk, get them to come back and, build that relationship. You don't know what's going to come back, what questions, you mightn't know everything. That's the risk, isn't it? Well, it's beautiful.
He calls it the beautiful risk, and a colleague of mine here in UL, who shall remain nameless, talks about keeping your foot in the door. Just keep the door open. Yeah. And Jessie Bazul says education is always a perpetually open question, because it does depend on what are the needs of society at any one moment.
Absolutely.
But you want to think that you're helping people. Education comes from educare. It's to lead out with care. So you want to lead out the person with care, and you want them to find themselves, and to do that is a lifelong journey of finding themselves. So you don't want to step in the way there. You don't know what those outcomes are. Yeah. You'd never be so arrogant as to be able to say what those outcomes are. If you're leading out with care, and you're an ethical guide, and you're a knowledgeable other alongside somebody as they're finding their way in the world, that's a beautiful view for me of what I've hoping and tried to do in my life as a teacher and as an educator, as opposed to somebody who comes in and says, well, look, in a deterministic way, just like as I used to love doing the theorems and maths, QED, here's the outcomes, away you go, we know it all, we've it all prescribed, here are the values, learn them off, pasher. So that's no living in a democracy.
No, and I want to get back to your word in care. Seriously, and do you ever see the word care in policy documents in education?
Well, if it's there as a muscular duty of care, a professional duty of care where you keep the child very far away from you, not in any kind of relationship of care that is connected to kind of the care you would give of children in a family.
Yes.
And then when they go to school, that you would have appropriate care, but it still would not be a clinical care like you'd get if you were going to visit a surgeon who was going to operate on you. That an educator has a relationship of care. Padraig Hogan, actually, in the University of Maynooth, as a philosopher, and he's put a beautiful word on it. He called it the heart work of teaching and learning.
And that's really good.
So that's soft, but it's beautiful, but it's actually so important.
Yes.
And it's a strong word for me that reminds me that I love my science, you see, and I love I think we need that scientific knowledge and mathematical knowledge and all the STEM knowledges. Of course we do. We can't have young people without the knowledge and being left behind. But for them to be educated and for us to walk beside them as educators and lead them out with care into that world where they have to know themselves and find themselves, they need the philosophy and be able to ask the questions why. So we need in Ireland, for me, when I heard everything on the radio this morning, I suppose the old teacher in me, I was saying, do you know, instead of wasting our time looking too much across the water, I think we need to be doing a little homework here. Somebody said, like, we've about 5 million people in Ireland, and 500,000, I don't know how many million people, was it 500,000 million people are in, are 500 million people that are in Europe as a market. And in a way, when you look at that and think about it, our homework should be investing in our infrastructure and in our housing and doing all of that so that we have joined up thinking so that our young people that work in the city in Dublin can get home on a nice fast electric train in the evening, that we can care for our people and our housing, and sure the companies will not only not leave us the lovely quality of life people have, it will get better.
Yeah.
I mean, that we've a lot of homework to be doing as opposed to being afraid of anybody in the Oval Office.
I agree totally, and we should be looking at more asking for and really kind of going out there for more funding for PhD studies.
Yes,
and
yes.
you know, within education and within the STEM education, which we work at ourselves, but also within other research areas. And as you know, this is all about building our, and it's you know, it's building our, I suppose, our brainy capital. Our capital,
our capacity for me, it's like, could we think about what a thriving economy would look like? There's no such thing as a free market. The state always intervenes and regulates. Yeah. So how do we have a thriving economy in Ireland now? Not one that's growing exponentially to the extent that is railroading over people. How do we have a decent democratic society in Ireland? Yeah. What do we need to do as people to grow up and actually start asking the right questions? And then how do we build a sustainable Ireland and have really good relationships with Europe, with Canada and with the USA as well as the rest of the world? How do we do that and kind of be bigger than all, if you like, in that space? And our education system needs to reflect that. It needs to reflect that we have people who are thinking, they're asking themselves their why questions, that they are preparing, that we're walking with them through care and bringing them into the world. We've had a wonderful relationship with all the local enterprises, Michelle, here in Epistem, like so many of them have come supporting us with enterprise and with all our PhDs and everything. So we are really doing a great work here at the centre, but it's like it's that wonderful reach out to the community. I know you're giving a paper, aren't you, in sociology in Britain? What are you doing?
I'm giving one in the British Sociological Association conference, which is on at the end of the month, and it's in Manchester University, and I'm really looking forward to it. So what I'm doing is I'm developing the concept of the inclusion of sociological thinking within education, and particularly in our area within the STEM education. And you might say, holy golly, what, you know, that it's adding on, is it adding on to the teachers? And it's not, you know, I'm looking at it as a perspective of, it's not you're expecting teachers, but it should be in the training some way in CPD, and it definitely, I think it should be in research. And you might say, why? It's because a sociological perspective in itself, it highlights how social contacts impacts not only on our way of thinking and acting and our decision making, but also on the lives of the young person in the classroom. So it's all about, so the central challenge, for example, for inclusive classrooms, which we're talking about, for building a good relationship and for everyone, to get the best out of their education, is about, I think, first of all, is from the part of educators, is making visible the power structures that are going on. And that's the only way we can know ourselves, where we fit in, and we can know others. And I've spoken to you before on Bordeaux, and he's very, very good for understanding how different people interact within a social space, within its culture, like the school system, and the way in which power and oppression within that culture, which is always in the norms, it's always in the little subtle things, positioning people, exactly.
So, and I mean, what is lovely about that, you see, this is very good to hear you talk about this, because we've relied in Ireland in education for many, many years too much on psychology of education. Just respect now to the psychologists of education who may be listening to us, but that is the science of behaviour, and it's fine, it's good, and it gives a lot of information. But we've forgotten history of education, philosophy of education, and the sociology position of knowing the past, knowing from the past to understand and make sense of the situation at the moment, in the moment, and then using that to be able to devise, what you want moving into the future. You need some thinking. But what I love is, again, Donna Haraway talks that when we're educating people and we're actually saying, like, it's an open question, it's an open ethical question, and where do you want the young person to land? Well, she says, stay with the trouble. So we actually want the young person to land, to be able to live happily in the space between certainty and uncertainty. Yeah. And there's a physicist, Rovelli, says the same thing. He says it's arrogant to say you know for certain what the future is going to hold. You've got to be able to live with, use your science of prediction, use your data, have that information, but be happy to live in the space, not in a risk-averse space where you're afraid of yourself and your shadow and you're afraid to do anything and you don't have any resilience and you don't know what you stand for. Because if you don't know what you stand for, they say you'll fall for everything. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that is a lovely image, metaphor, is that it's sitting between, what is the risk, or in that area between what you can control and what you don't know in the future. Yeah. And it's and it's a great way of doing the whole thinking, because it's all about the content knowledge. Of course, the content knowledge is so important, because you can't, that is the foundation, as is the pedagogical and building the relationship with the child. But knowing ourselves within this whole process, we as the teachers, the educators, if we don't know ourselves, how we fit in, how we're fitting in with the norms, how we categorise, how we even think, like you're talking about behaviour, you've all these words about, oh, they're not very motivated, oh, they're not very aspirational, or whatever, or they're motivated and aspirational. There's usually a social class thing in behind all of that.
There is, often gender, social class, race, disability.
And it's like you said, we need to look at those words.
We do.
And we need to see what's the history of them.
Yes.
And that's the sociological thing, is knowing that history.
Well, I've more and more, I love the philosophy and the history too, because, I know we love the podcasts. We're listening to Kathy Kay and Scaramucci on their...
Oh, we're going back to America now again.
I know, we're back again to The Rest is Politics US, and The Rest is Politics UK. The Irish Times have a very good podcast as well. They run a regular one on Irish politics. So we love listening to all of that. I like politics, history, philosophy, the whole lot.
Yes, same here.
So I think we'll finish.
To finish off, I've tasked Geraldine a question. So you are talking at a very big conference next week, the ESAI. And
yes, the ESAI is the Irish Educational Studies Association of Ireland, of course, and we have our annual conference in the Sheraton Hotel in Athlone and the coming week, and we've actually formed a special interest group. You're with us, Michelle, on it, right. And we have formed this for the last 2 years. years, and we're moving now into our third year on it. And we have actually called this a critical and feminist special interest group. And we've got a very, very interesting number of members, and we've got a huge committee, and we're connected to all the universities in Ireland now, and all the HEIs. They all show up at our public seminars, and we've been inviting world-renowned people who are in the same, who have the same, I suppose, key principles and values.
Yeah.
So our values are, we've been following the framework from UNESCO 2021, which was actually asking us to humanise education for a new social contract for education. They said, we're at a crossroads. It was post-COVID world. Could we think of what's the way we need to talk about education and pull it away from being too narrow, just only focus on qualification and skills and pipelines of talent? And could we just pull it out a bit and accordion it out a bit and understand that if it's only that, we're going to lose the social cohesion of our society, the decency of our society, the sustainability of our environment and planet, so that we need to keep the whole lot in there. And so we've drawn from, I suppose, we're in the interstices between, I suppose, critical pedagogy and feminist studies. Yeah. But we're looking at that humanising education, bringing the human to the centre. And my gosh, isn't that important now with the rise in artificial intelligence and the danger of all of us all being seen as just Autobots?
Well, that's why we need to keep clinging to that humanising human part.
The human,
we really do.
Putting the human back at the centre.
Absolutely.
And then being able to understand what is, like, if education is about human development and change, and it's actually a study of that as a discipline, we need to have the human at the heart of that, clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we'll continue this conversation because I think we could keep talking forever about it. So do you want to add anything before we finish up?
No, not at all. Not at all. Thank you, Geraldine. It was a lovely conversation. And yes, as you said, we'll continue it. We're always continuing it over
we will.
Coffee.
And in my European work as well, all these things are bouncing around in our heads at the moment now. And it is a crossroads. It's a very exciting time to be involved, in reshaping and rethinking about the important things in education and how we need to make sure that we include that in our thinking and our planning going ahead in Ireland.
Exactly.
Okay, so our musical treat for this evening and for today is we have actually Ayaz Mahmood back again with us. Ayaz is a composer. He's a singer-songwriter. He plays acoustic guitar beautifully, and he's a final year student in the BA in Performing Arts in World Music and in the Irish World Academy of Music and Dance here at the University of Limerick. And Ayaz is going to sing and play a beautiful song in Urdu, which is, he's told me, the language used in Pakistan. So it's going to be a bilingual song in Urdu, and it's a love song, and it's called Widu, and it's a love song, and it's to be with you is this yearning in the love song, Widu.
मेरी होना अब तो ये बात तुम कहो ना, बीते लम्हों को ना खोना, तुमसे है मेरी ये जान, कह दो ना मेरी होना अब तो ये बात तुम कहो ना, बीते लम्हों को ना खोना, तुमसे है मेरी ये जान, कह दो ना। आँखें क्यों है नम, दिल में क्यों है गम, बिन तेरे जीना ऐसा, मेरी जान मेरी होना। so close, and I'm looking for something to hold. Every touch, every word in my soul. With you, I never be alone. जिंदगी तेरे साथ, चाहूं मैं तेरा साथ, मेरी जान, हम भी अधूरे तन्हा है सफर हो मेरी होना. मेरी होना, मेरी होना, मेरी होना, मेरी होना.